All right.
The first,
Hi, I'm Terri Murphy for the Data Advocate and here with Saul Klein, also with the Data Advocate. And Saul's been a longtime visionary in the real estate industry. And he's really just recently, with all of the NAR litigation issues coming up, has put together an overview. Saul, tell us a little bit about what's going on with NAR.
well, so there's lots of things that are going on in the real estate industry, and lots of things we could talk about, but there are some things that are catching people's attention. And so we thought it might be interesting just to cover four of them. So we'll limit this to four major issues, and don't by any means think that that's all that's going on right now, because there's an awful lot more than that. Well, so the first thing that's catching everybody's attention is the sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, hostile work environment complaints against the National Association of Realtors. You might have heard about it, read about it, where employees have complained about the work environment in NAR, and specifically complained about the NAR president 2023, Kenny Purcell, who resigned from the presidency, and Tracy Casper took over early as the next president of NAR, the National Association of Realtors. So an investigation was conducted, and some 30 or so complaints from people who work at NAR that we're afraid to go to work, they're afraid of the environment. And of course, this caused a big buzz in the industry. Lots of people complaining about the organization, about my dues dollars don't go to that, shouldn't be spent on that. And so that's big news. When the president of NAR resigns, that's big news. And from my perspective, and you probably agree, and tell me if you don't, NAR is a big organization, and it's an old organization. It's got like 300 employees, 30 complaints. That's not good, but 30 complaints over what period of time? How bad is that really? Again, one complaint's too many. I get that. But 30 complaints, this organization that does a lot of good for people who practice real estate. And you and I know a lot of really great people who work at NAR. And we've known a lot of really great people for many years. And so when we read in the press how bad it is at NAR, I always like to remind people that there are good people there. That by and large, at least my experience with this is that most of the people are really good people. Most of the work that's done is really good work. And people are trying to pin the blame on certain individuals, certain people in leadership, and the person who it seems, and we don't know because there's not been any trial, and there have been settlements. And of course, any big corporation, when confronted with sexual harassment or any type of wrongful termination or employee complaints, often settlements take place, and often those settlements are confidential, and often nobody is admitting any guilt when that takes place. So this is a big deal that there's this sexual misconduct allegations against the National Association of Realtors. A lot of people are upset about it, and I believe that you need to look at this in context.
I agree. And quite frankly, when you're one of the, if not the largest trade association on the planet, there's bound to be some issues at some point. But like you pointed out, with this many years of really nothing this pivoting, in the long run, you have to look at the reputation and the business practices over the years. So it would obviously get big press because it's the first time in really a long time, if you and I agree. Is it time to go on to the second issue?
Yeah, I think so. So that's the first big issue. And like anything, we always say, what? Text without context is pretext. And so make sure you put everything in context. The next big issue is litigation. And litigation with 3 antitrust cases and 1 Department of Justice case against the National Association of Realtors. Now, 3 of these cases, the civil litigation, are class action lawsuits,
and they're pretty old too. I mean,
they've been around. They've been around for a while. So the first case is Merrill versus NAR and a lot of other defendants. The second one is Sitzler versus NAR and a number of other defendants. The third one is No Select versus MLS PIN, which is the big MLS private, we call it private, but not an NAR MLS up in the New England area. And the last one is the Department of Justice against the National Association of Realtors. So a little history of these cases, because they all kind of hinge around the same thing. And that is that these plaintiffs allege that the defendants, the National Association of Realtors, major franchises, and MLSs, conspired to inflate commissions and keep it in commissions inflated over many years, and have done this through this mandatory compensation rule. So, we're familiar with MLSs, and one of the ways that MLSs function, probably I used to call it a pillar of MLS, was an offer of compensation. And prior to the offer of compensation, which became a rule in 1996, was the unilateral offer of subagency. So unilateral offer of subagency as a pillar of MLS changed in 1996 as the compensation vehicle. Because one of the things that makes the MLS work is that there's a compensation vehicle tied to it, right?
And they have to be for competition, right?
Right. So the compensation vehicle that's tied to it requires that only one contract and membership in the MLS will provide compensation to both broker sides to the transaction. And so we've got this clause in the MLS model rules that indicate that if you're a member of the MLS and you submit a listing, then any other member of the MLS, you'll share commission with them. And they can represent the buyer, you can represent the seller, but the one contract is the listing contract that's signed with the seller. So basically what MLS has ensured for years is that you only need one contract to ensure compensation, and that's a contract with the seller. You don't have to have a contract with the buyer, because somebody that represents the buyer doesn't have to have a contract with the buyer. All they have to do is belong to an MLS, where a requirement for listings is that there's an offer, there's compensation stated in the listing agreement. The listing agent puts it in the MLS, and the MLS offers compensation through the MLS. So what the Department of Justice and the plaintiffs have said is that this offer of compensation, this buyer broker commission rule, is a violation of antitrust laws. And really, the sellers, even though they might be informed that they only have to offer $1, that was right, $1, they don't have to offer 3%, $1, but everybody offers 3% or 2.5% or whatever, it's more than $1. That artificially holds commissions higher. And this lawsuit, the first one being Merrill, they're suing to go back like 4 years. And because it's an antitrust lawsuit, there's an opportunity for triple damages. And so in the case, the Merrill case, the big defendants are the National Association of Realtors, Keller Williams, RE/MAX, Anywhere. And the big news here is that RE/MAX settled for $55 million, and Anywhere settled for $83.5 million. And they agreed to make sure that sellers know that they don't have to offer commission to a buyer broker. That's a big deal.
It's a huge change and transition and impact into the real estate industry as we've known it.
No, absolutely. So this buyer broker commission rule causes commissions to be artificially inflated. That's the case. And so what the settlement indicates is that not that anybody admits wrongdoing, but this is going to be a very expensive case to litigate. And so with potential damages, I've read up to $14 billion, which would bankrupt the defendants where
Right.
they'd lose, right?
That
And
would
so,
change, that would force a number of changes in how real estate is conducted.
yes, if there was no compensation rule, then people who work with buyers to ensure compensation are going to have to get a compensation contract from a buyer, which we've been talking about for years, but nobody really
Right.
takes us seriously about this, right? So the plaintiffs, or excuse me, the defendants are also the 25 largest MLSs in the country. I'll read a few of them. Bright MLS in the Baltimore, Maryland, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, big MLS. My Florida Regional MLS, 5 MLSs in the Midwest covering Cleveland, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. 6 MLSs in the Southwest covering Austin, Dallas, Houston, Las Vegas, Phoenix, and San Antonio. 3 MLSs in the Mountain West area. We're talking about Colorado Springs, Denver, Salt Lake City, and 4 MLSs in the Southeast covering Fort Myers, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Raleigh. There's Charlotte, North Carolina, and Raleigh, North Carolina. And the 2 settlements I already talked about are Remax for $55 million and Anywhere, which used to be Realogy, right? Which is ERA, Better Homes, Sotheby's, Cochran, Century 20 or Coldwell Banker, settled for $83.5 million. So that's a big case. And so there's only 2 settlements. They got all those big MLSs. And so it's a big case. It's a civil litigation, right?
That's going to be huge. I mean, and there's been the 2 settlements, but there's more to come.
Well, then that's the whole, right? Those 2 settlements. And so this week, Merrill is going to trial. So 2 of them have settled out, and the others, it appears, are going to trial. And we'll see what happens. So stay tuned on this antitrust case. The next one is Sitzer versus the National Association of Realtors. And this is the same idea, same case against the buyer compensation rule. And it's in Missouri, right? So just a smaller case, but still a big case. The defendants are National Association of Realtors,
Home Services,
Realogy Holding, Home Services of America, Long and Foster, Remax, Keller Williams, right? Big time. 4 MLSs, huh?
Is it Keller Williams corporate or Keller Williams?
Keller Williams corporate.
Okay.
4 MLSs in Missouri, and this goes back to 2014. So they're going to go back to anybody that sold a property back to 2014 could be a member of this class, right? And this class action litigation. And it's Kansas City MLS, St. Louis MLS, Springfield, Missouri, and Columbia, Missouri. So that's the Sitzer case. So that's 2 cases, right? Merrill, which is a big one, 14 billion.
Right.
This other one's not peanuts, right? And that is Sitzer. And then the third case is No Select. And this is No Select versus MLS PIN. And this is where MLS PIN, which is not an NAR type of MLS, has agreed to pay $3 million in damages, or $3 million in a settlement to the plaintiffs. And the defendants are MLS PIN, Anywhere, Coldwell Banker, Sotheby's, Better Homes, ERA, Home Services of America, Remax of New England, Remax
then they-
Integrated Regions, Keller Williams Inc. This is a big case as well. And
So-
the ML,
So they can go over regional corporates as well as the headquarters?
yeah.
That's
And
gonna
so
be sig-
this one, the MLS, this is an interesting case because the MLS, now I just went over all those different defendants, the MLS just being one, and the MLS decided that it was going to settle 3 million, and then the 3 million would be divided up amongst the plaintiffs. Half of it would go to the plaintiffs, not very much, and then the rest of it would be used to pay attorney's fees and create a legal fund so that the plaintiffs could go after the other defendants. So the litigation is gonna be funded, the further litigation funded by the MLS, of which the defendants are probably members.
Oh, this gets more complicated every minute, doesn't it?
Well, and so the settlement, the plaintiffs and the defendants settled for that 3 million. MLS PIN and the plaintiff settled. And then the Department of Justice, which isn't a party to this litigation, stepped in and said, we don't like the settlement. Now, another parameter of the settlement is that the real estate subscribers and participants of MLS PIN must get some kind of certification from sellers, where sellers state that they understand that they have no obligation to pay an agent who represents the buyer. And so you'd think that's pretty good to say, well, if the public doesn't know, you're making this MLS make their members get certification that the seller knows they don't have to pay commission to a buyer broker. And even with that, the Department of Justice stepped in and said, we don't like this settlement. Wait a minute, you're not even a part of this. Yeah, we're the Department of Justice and we don't like this settlement.
We can do whatever we want. Is that it?
We don't like it. And basically what they're doing, the Department of Justice wants to wait until this Merrill case gets rolling. And so they don't want the settlement to take place because, now here's the obvious point, the Department of Justice doesn't want a settlement. They don't want there to be any offer of compensation, even if it's zero, which to me isn't an offer of compensation at all. But they want to remove completely the offer of compensation from the structure of MLS, which will change the whole way that real estate's practiced, right? It's going to require buyer broker contracts to ensure commissions if you represent a buyer.
And if you remember when buyer broker contracts came out, because you and I go pretty far back, it was really a challenge to get the buyers to sign them to make them understand the process.
Well, so here's the deal. It was a challenge, and that the reason that the industry, the opportune time to start to get buyers to sign contracts was when agency disclosure law came into being, right? Because you had to disclose agency anyway, but nobody wanted to ask a buyer to sign a contract because you would be in the minority if you asked. And if you did ask, then buyers might say, this was the fear, well, Saul, why would I sign a contract with you? Terri didn't ask me to sign a contract.
Exactly.
And so the industry never evolved to the buyer broker and the buyers having to sign contracts. This is going to force, right? This is going to force this on us. And so those are the three big civil lawsuits, class action civil lawsuits with huge potential damages and already settlements. And they are Merrill being tried right now or in the next day or two, Sitzer in Missouri, and No Select in New England. And then there's one more big one. It's the Department of Justice versus the National Association of Realtors. This is the antitrust case against NAR.
Which they've been trying to execute for as long as I've been in real estate.
Yeah, the Department of Justice's beef with NAR goes back to, actually predates you and me, right? And so there actually was, I won't embarrass you, but I got my real estate license in 1975, right? And in 1983, and there was a litigation against the San Diego Association of Realtors, antitrust litigation in 1978, and the Federal Trade Commission issued and we should probably publish this somewhere, this investigation of the real estate industry in 1983, and it all went downhill from there. Right. So this goes back a long ways. And so there are many different reasons over the years the Department of Justice has come after NAR. And the most recent one is the offer of compensation. And so the Department of Justice was going after NAR, and then lo and behold, 3 civil cases pop up that are also going after this very same thing. So the Department of Justice kind of sitting back, and they're going to let these civil cases develop. And I got to think that these civil cases are going to be successful. And the offer of compensation is going to go away. And then the DOJ is going to step in with the enforcer. And the enforcer is the FTC, Federal Trade Commission. And real estate's going to change. So our advice to anybody listening to this is learn how to use buyer broker contracts. Exactly. Learn how to, express your value proposition using a buyer broker contract. So those are the first 2 issues. We talked about the sexual harassment at NAR, and then these litigation. The third issue that you might have read about is that Redfin quit NAR.
And that was a huge statement.
Well, a huge statement, but I think it's overplayed because people don't like NAR for one reason or another. So they want to make things look bigger than they are. And so I don't even know how many agents are Redfin agents. And so what if Redfin quits? Let them quit. I also think that but people say, yeah, but if Redfin quits, how many of the other franchises are going to quit? And Redfin is not a franchise. How many of the other big brokers are going to quit? And I say, well, maybe some will, but maybe this is a good time to double down on your support of the industry. This might be a good time for an entity like Zillow, which has been the villain in the real estate industry, to come out and be a hero and say, I'm with NAR. NAR does great things. Why do you think you have the mortgage interest deduction? Why do you think you still have 1031 exchanges? Why do you think you have flood insurance? It's like, what have the Romans done for us lately? Oh, the roads. Yeah, well, other than the roads, what have the Romans done for us lately? Well, sanitation. Oh, well, other than roads and sanitation, what have the Romans done? Remember, that's a Monty Python thing. Right. Yeah. And so people ask that about NAR. I think NAR does a lot of things. And so, but this one made big news because there are people, the press, that like to, bring in text without context as pretext, and they like to bring in the negative side. But that made big news. Redfin quits. I say, so what? Right. I say they're probably running out of money. They weren't making any money anyway. And so here's an opportunity for them to cut some expenses, maybe. But that was big news. And there's speculation others might quit. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Now, the fourth issue is that Anywhere and other major franchises have made realtor membership by their franchisees optional.
That's good. So, that's huge.
Well, people say it's huge, but I think that, so what if they make it optional? I didn't even know that it was a requirement that you, to own a franchise, some of these franchises, that you had to be a member of NAR. Now, in some states, you still have to be a member of the realtor organization to access the MLS. Are you going to quit being a realtor if your MLS privileges are dependent upon being a realtor? I don't think so, because the most important service that people really receive in the real estate industry is MLS. I love the code of ethics, and I love education, and I love professional standards. And the fact is, most people don't join the realtor organization for those things.
No, but the standardization, as you and I well know, looking at international work, is that there has to be standards, and those standards ensure a number of things: credibility, timeliness, the kinds of things that go with it. So it was interesting to me that Redfin would quit. What does that do for them?
Well, see, it saves them money.
Oh, okay.
And
There's
and and maybe it's a social statement,
well,
right?
what was their reason? Their reason was the whole core value thing with the NAR. Wasn't that
Yeah, that's a piece of it. But I just think they took the opportunity because it was an opportune time and they could make up a story around it. And whether or not they believe it, who knows? Right. And I don't think it's that big a deal. All the Redfin dues dollars that come into my association could leave and the association would still function.
And you're in San Diego, which has been one of the major portals forever. In the
And we
real
have our
estate.
own issues. We have our own issues in San Diego, right? So, those are the issues today that you'll read a lot about in the industry. Let's review them, right? The first one was the sexual harassment environment at NAR. The second one was the litigation with these major cases that we talked about, the 3 civil cases and the 1 DOJ case. The third one was Redfin quitting NAR. And the fourth one was major franchises no longer requiring NAR affiliation to own the franchise. And those are the 4 major issues that we are reading about today.
Well, I know that we've got some timeliness with some of the cases going back to court this week. So can we count on you for next week for another update?
We'll do our best. Hopefully there'll be some news. There usually is.
Hopefully. Well, I'm Terri Murphy for the Data Advocate with Saul Klein. Join us for another segment of industry updates coming up next.